Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for new ComHack episodes every week.
Hello, welcome to ComHack, where we master communications one hack at a time. We're glad you chose to join us. I encourage you to go back and watch some of the older episodes. Last episode, we were talking about compliance gaining, and so why don't we jump right in? And Tim, compliance gaining and that whole process of goals, plans, actions, I know you had some thoughts that would maybe be additive to the conversation. What say you?
Yeah, well, I think if I was just thinking about like way back, high school English class, I think I remember learning about Aristotle.
Time travel,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like
that was way back.
So like think back, Aristotle, he talks about persuasion and these three different things that you can use for persuasion. And I think this fits in with the compliance gaining theory, where you're looking for those actions to take. This would fit right in that action section of the GPA model that we talked about last time.
So Aristotle, rhetorician.
Yes.
Rhetoric.
Yes.
Rhetoric. Man, rhetoric, rhetorical, rhetoric. When people say rhetoric or rhetorical, that's kind of a funny word to begin with, obviously,
yes,
as I keep saying it. But when people say rhetorical, many times that kind of it has a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Because people think it's a sarcastic or like, I didn't really want you to answer that question, it was a rhetorical question. Or if it's rhetoric, we go to the political side of things and we think that people are just saying things for the fact of saying them or for the sake of saying them, but they're not really heartfelt. It's just a bunch of political rhetoric, or right-wing, left-wing rhetoric. Yeah. So rhetoric and rhetoricians and rhetorical, all of those things are kind of, there's a negative connotation, but it's not really a negative thing. It's just been hijacked by people who use it negatively. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. With those negative aspects of rhetoric, they are still touching on some of the aspects that was taught by Aristotle, where he says like there's three ways you can really go about persuading people, and they all need to kind of work together to present an effective argument. So he goes through, for example, there's one called logos, which is just the logic. That's the bread and butter of your argument. That would be where we talked about the if-then statements last week. But that's kind of where that falls in. It's the this is the argument. This is the
very
logic
linear
connections.
logic.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he says, in addition to that, if you just present logic, if I just tell you need to do these things, it may not be as effective as if I added in some pathos, which is more of the emotional side. It's that almost like a dramatization, and that's where the political rhetoric can come in, where they make these grandiose promises, or the speech writers will create a really verbose, enjoyable to listen to speech. And that's the emotion, that's the pathos that gets poured into the argument. So you have the bread, and then the butter is going to be your pathos. Okay. So it's a little more sweeter, it's a little more easier to take in. Now, the last one is the ethos. That's going to be more of the credibility of the person giving the argument. So if some homeless person on the street is telling me about the politics of the day versus a presidential candidate telling me about the politics, it could be the same speech, but the presidential candidate's going to have more of an ear because of the credibility that comes behind the party's support for that person. So if I have the bread of the logic, the butter of the emotion, and then the credibility of the person who's prepared the meal, then it becomes a very palatable, very digestible argument for the person. And going back, like even just gaining compliance that we've talked about, gaining compliance more and more with a person increases that credibility, that ethos of your argument in future instances. So that's really where the Aristotle part of it would fit into this theory.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that we all are rhetoricians at different times. We're talking, we're communicating. So rhetoric is not something that is just left for politicians. Aristotle was onto something. You know, the way we talk can influence people that we're talking to. We can communicate and get compliance, get people to believe what we believe, or shift their actions, or change their day-to-day activities because we've communicated with them. We're rhetors, pastors, people that preach every Sunday. They're rhetors. They're giving rhetoric, and it's their process of communicating is a rhetorical process. They're trying to communicate something, and as you said, they need the credibility, that ethos. They need some color. They need to make it enjoyable. They need to make it something that would touch the hearts and minds of the people through the pathos. And then they also need, obviously, the logic. It's got to make sense.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense, it's going to be hard to convince people towards whatever it is you're trying to convince them. Which makes for an interesting conversation that we won't get into on theology and logic and all of that. Maybe we could do that in a future episode.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. But I think that's great. So what would the hack be for taking the Aristotle approach? What's the hack for our viewers?
I think the hack is when you're approaching that GPA model we talked about last week, the goals, plans,
planning,
action. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
When you're planning your actions, right in that transition, keep in mind the Aristotle aspects of persuasion. You need to have a logical argument. You need to have an emotional buy-in, and you need to understand your credibility, not necessarily try and gain credibility within the argument, but understand the credibility you bring to the table.
That's excellent. So making sure that you have those three different components, the Aristotle components, when you're planning out what you're going to do in communication to gain the goal of compliance or whatever. It seems like one thing that would be very beneficial, go back 2 episodes, listen. Listen. You got to listen to your audience, listen to whoever it is you're talking to in order to be able to shape that proper argument that's going to be logical to them, because I've been listening to what they're saying, that's going to touch the hearts and minds, the compassionate element of the conversation, whoever I'm speaking to, and also continue to build the credibility, of course, of the person speaking through repeated successes in that process.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about going back episodes, you can go back several episodes, and we can talk about credibility and gaining credibility with your blogs and with your platform building.
That's absolutely the case. It's all part of the process. Build your platform, build your reputation of who you are and what you stand for, and then you're credible to speak on certain things. And so, I think that we could go back multiple episodes. I just want to encourage you, go back and look at some of the other episodes.
Yeah.
You can find them all at on YouTube at Communication Hack, and of course communicationhack.com. You can find us there. But this is ComHack. I'm Joshua Weiss. You can follow me at Joshua D. Weiss.
And I'm Tim Jones. You can follow me at TLJonesy_.
And until next time, continue mastering communications one hack at a time.